All right. So spring training's been really fun so far. And of course, we are, in fact, 1 week away from the World Baseball Classic and talking a lot about those Chicago Cubbies via the Global Satellite Network presented by StreamYard. Matt Cozzi on Locked On Cubs. So, I've spoke with a lot of people in the baseball realm, and it has been taking a bunch of adjustment with these new rule changes, pitching counts, and so much more with this. How have you felt with the new adjusted rules? What this will eventually impact? Because it's going to take some time, but how this will completely adjust with the way we look at Major League Baseball further and beyond.
Yeah, it's definitely had a big impact so far. The time of games have decreased by 20, 25 minutes already based on the spring training numbers that we have. I do think there's some kinks to work out. We'll see how really teams take their temperature with automatic strikes, automatic balls, just based on infractions related to not getting in the box in time or not pitching the ball in time. So I think MLB, rightfully so, is being aggressive in that process now, where the calendar is on baseball's side. If all this could get worked out before March 30th on opening day, I think it'll be fine. I do think it still could take a couple weeks into the season, but beyond that, the numbers say it should be fine at that point. Major League Baseball has thousands of games in which they did a pitch clock the last couple of years in the minor leagues. And the amount of infractions based on the number of games really plummets about 20, 25 games in. So figure the first month, maybe we see the whistle blown, if you will, even in the big league action. But I think so far so good, because pace of play was really the problem. And you're seeing that really ramped up now, even though it's obviously forced.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I've told people this. You are not going to pay me to watch at least a 3+ hour baseball game on a Tuesday night, knowing that, hey, I got to work, kids got to go to school, all this stuff. And it was harder for a lot of fans because of the fact that time overstretched so long. I love this change because I think about this even with, the NFL, the amount of time that you got to snap the ball out from the time you're set in the line of scrimmage to where you got to be the playmaker. And so in that point, we know there was maybe a few kinks. Watching Max Scherzer Max Scherzer at the last time when he did, it was a little confusing, but it was like, I say this, the batter's in the box and he's unaware of what's happening. You have to be aware of it. You have to kind of pay attention to a lot of those small things. So I think it really does work, and it showed. It's now gone to 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe even if we get to 2 hours and 15 minutes, who knows? That would be the quickest game, but then it would be worth all that because we're not going through the overstretches because it's so long, and it was just, it was exhausting. But the one thing I'm interested in too is because the new ghost runner rule, and I've always said this to a lot of people, I think in the regular season, I'd allow it. In the postseason would be different because I want it to be pressurizing. I want it to be exciting. But the regular season, this will help a little bit more, especially when we come into longer games that go 12 or 13 plus innings, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I honestly think it'll be something down the stretch that, Major League Baseball, a lot of, there's a lot of traditional guys that have to get on board with this. And, and the funny thing is they'll complain about it, but yet we see them in the ballpark anyway.
Yeah, so and I do think baseball got a little bit of a bad rap because is anyone talking about college football? That is consistently 3.5 hours. NFL is pretty much three hours straight up. NBA seems to be pretty consistent, college sports. But yeah, I do think that there's things that they're able to put in place to increase that pace of play. I think it's fine. You mentioned Max Scherzer. There was an equally good moment with Carlos Correa this past week. He made his spring training debut. And after one of the first pitches he had took, he kind of had to catch himself. He stepped out of the box and he was about to do his 30-second walk. It's like, dude, that's why we put this in, because of you.
Yep.
And not him specifically, but it's like, well, where were you going? And so that's a strike now, and as it should be, because let's just get it moving a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's great because it keeps both pitchers and batters accountable for a lot of things, and it doesn't make it so obvious, because I know when it comes to batters, like, I'll be honest, I've been raised in the old school of baseball. Anybody that walks off that kind of gives me a little of like this kind of like sweeping off the dust off your shoulders, hey, I'm going to go at it. Like that's always been the instinctive part of it. And I know a lot of pitchers, they would do the same. So, moving to the Chicago Cubs. So, covering this team, you've been there since the time when, Theo Epstein really took this team by storm and was saying, look, we got to make a lot of adjusted changes. I want to make this a championship running team. And I've loved it, even to the point where they were the 2016 World Series champions, and so much potential and talent was growing from there. So, looking at last season, we knew this was the step back for the Cubs, and we know it's a wonky division in the Central, to be honest, with it's kind of wide open for a lot of people. Going from last season to where this offseason, they added upgrades. They added a lot of, good names. This was kind of part of that plan, because they knew they had to take a refresher, and now they started to spend the money in the right places to where they are, and they want to compete for this Central division, right?
I think the biggest question right now is the rebuild over? Because you had such a great era of Cubs baseball where you mentioned Theo Epstein comes in, and completely overchanges everything, down to the, from the bathrooms to the ball field. Everything was different. And the Cubs capitalized on that in 2016. Unfortunately, they paid a price just in terms of development of pitching, especially. The development and ascent of the core players didn't really happen. They capitalized on the window in which they were all good for that 2 or 3 or 4 years, but definitely plummeted and kind of plateaued. And to build the team back up now, I think has been, even in some ways, more of a challenge as the first rebuild, just because of where the game was going and the different trends. And the Cubs just lacked a lot of that in terms of the pitching infrastructure and making more contact, not selling out all the time with, okay, is one swing going to produce a home run or a swing and miss? And so putting the ball in play more and putting runners in motion more, things like that. But it looks like this is the year where they're definitely making a pivot, and the intention is, okay, we're going to compete. The rebuild is over. The 2021 trade deadline was really hard. They traded all their core guys. But what has happened now is, through all these trades, now President Jed Hoyer, he's actually done a really nice job, because if you look at their top 10 prospect list, MLB.com just updated theirs this week, their top 30 rather, 7 of the top 15 prospects were acquired in trades just since December of 2020. So they've really done a nice job there. And then you mentioned free agency. They signed 9 free agents this winter. You could write out a lineup just with those guys. So they certainly spent money. A lot of those deals are 1-year deals until those prospects graduate, probably in 2024. But it's at least an interesting product right now. Definitely an improved product from last year. So we'll see what happens. The division is weaker than most.
Yeah, it is interesting, and watching it, because I know it's definitely going to be one of those arms race type of years in the Central, because of the fact of, I like what the Brewers have, but even in some stretches, they could have a tendency to slow down. I like the Cardinals, but if they're not as consistent as they usually should, because I mean, you got an MVP year out of Paul Goldschmidt, and then you have Nolan Arenado as one of your other power hitters. But I mean, you look at the last year, which I thought last year was going to be it, but the last official year of Adam Wainwright before retirement really knocks on his door. And then, you know, you got the Cubbies. And so I look at this and free agent signings, and one, if you could evaluate and probably pick out one who I think stands out the most. So they signed Dansby Swanson to a long-term contracted deal. I thought this could very much work because it was one of those positions the Cubs really needed to improve on. They then pick up Cody Bellinger. They pick up Eric Hosmer and several pieces. Who of those signings do you really see is just, man, he was a diamond in the rough, but he's going to come out and be very impactful for this Cubs roster?
Yeah, I think Swanson is definitely the headliner, right? He's somebody that the Cubs needed to add. There was about a week period in the offseason and on our show where we were wondering, are the Cubs going to do anything? We were getting impatient, but it materialized where Swanson was the guy. They've really upgraded their defense with him because now Nico Horner shifts from short to second.
That's right.
And with Bellinger, you can make the case that they have the best up the middle defense in the whole game. So that's really what their plan is this year, is pitching and defense. So you look at Swanson, and then I would say Jameson Taillon as well. That he was there. If Swanson was the top flight position guy they brought in, then Taillon was the top flight pitching guy. You know, he projects on paper as a number 3. But in this rotation, he's more of a number 2, and very early indications, early sample sizes, but he's been great this spring. The last 2 years, he's been really solid. The Yankees, he was a Pirate before that. So I think Swanson and Taillon are the easy ones to say, and they should be. They should have that type of impact, especially given the improvements this team has made. But I'm really curious to see the Hosmer-Mancini combo, because the Cubs sign Eric Hosmer, and understandable. They had an opening at first base. They do have a prospect, Matt Mervis, that is knocking on the door. We'll see if he has anything to say about it. But they were always discussing Hosmer and Mancini. And when they signed Hosmer, we thought, oh, well, there's no chance with Mancini. And then hours after the Cubs convention ended, Mancini was announced as being signed. So how are they going to balance these two guys? Right now, the lineup includes both of them, with Mancini at DH. But both of these guys have made a ton of hard contact already this first week of spring.
Yeah, and it really is exciting to watch a lot of these free agents that the Cubs have really picked up. And even, you know, building upon what last year gave us, I mean, you're talking about youngsters with Nico Horner. You still got at least a veteran in Ian Happ. And then the other part is we're seeing that, you know, the growth and development of Christopher Morel. So there is some of that, that rejuvenated juice that the Cubs are really looking forward to in the 23 season. So, and of course too, I mean, you know, I want to point out Seiya Suzuki. I mean, him coming in the building and really kind of giving you that preview of what the Cubs really should look like this year, is just one that's going to be really exciting. So, you know, so this pitching staff, it does look completely different. We know we were used to the rotation where we had John Lester, we had, you know, you still have Kyle Hendricks and several others. Now the change has happened, and Hendricks still there, but now Jameson Taillon. We know that I would say in their movement, they're really looking forward to doing building and development in the rotation, especially with young arms. Is there somebody that you've evaluated, what, you know, in the minor leagues who could honestly be, you know, when he comes up, he's going to be the next exciting thing if, for whatever reason, would happen to those two pitchers, Hendricks and Taillon? Definitely
Hayden Wesneski. Wesneski was acquired for Scott Effross at the trade deadline this past summer, in a trade with the Yankees. Wesneski is a top 10 prospect already for the Cubs. And the twist with him is that he was actually promoted down the stretch last year. So he pitched 30 plus innings of big league ball, in which he really did well. And so he is really the person that I have my eye on right now, Jake, because he is injecting a lot of buzz in the team and the fan base with his pitch mix and his slider, his cutter are really plus pitches that he has that have just a ton of movement, something that Cubs pitching really hasn't had. His fastball velo is plus a velo. Although if you look at some of the velos out there, it's kind of like a video game now. But I think Wisniewski's the guy. He might be in the rotation on March 30th, depending on what happens with that fifth spot. Kyle Hendricks, it looks like, is going to miss opening day. And so maybe like a May 1st target return for him. So the competition is wide open. There's a couple of veterans in there, but I think Wisniewski, baseball reasons and buzz reasons, would really be a good choice there.
Yeah, and honestly, especially with youngsters that have been moving up into in the Major League Baseball level. I mean, a lot of them's got some great stuff, and there's been a lot of like buzzes this year with as far as youngster pitching, especially for those that are really looking to bolster their rotation. I've always said this: with the trend that we're looking at now is that the bullpen has been so important for a lot of contending teams, which you could go with a longer stretch of bullpen and not have to feel like, oh, we're missing one or two arms from here. But you could feel very expendable from there. But it's going to be exciting stuff for the Cubs. I can't wait to see what the rotation will look like for the near future. And especially too, with how this year will really pan out. So one thing before letting you go, and so this Central Division, we know for a fact it's an arms race from here. And so looking at it and evaluating the Cubs roster from top to bottom and potential prospects that may come up during the time when the call-ups happen and depending on the momentum. Because I kind of see the Cubs, they really have that talent and they really have a lot of those names where they could possibly shoot to be, disruptors in that division, where they could probably shoot for the second place spot. Because I think the Pirates and the Cubs, they're clearly in rebuild mode. They're looking for the next big thing in their rosters. How do you really see this out with the Cubs and with the competition they've got in front of them with the Cardinals and, of course, the Brewers?
I like the word disruptor. I think I'm going to steal that one when I get off it. But yeah, I think that's exactly where they are. They're firmly in third place right now. And as you say, the Pirates and Reds are at the bottom. That's clear. And the Brewers and Cardinals are clearly ahead. The Brewers have some of the best starting pitching in baseball. The Cardinals have one of the best lineups in the game. You'd almost like to combine, those two teams. But I do think, though, that even with as strong as those clubs are, there's still a little bit to be desired. It's not a all-out, okay, this team is going to win the division. Clearly, there's a front runner, the Cardinals, clearly. And the Brewers are clearly ahead of the Cubs. However, if the first month or two of the season, especially in the case of the Brewers, does not go well, I think that could be the beginning of the end for that team up north, as we like to say on the show.
Yeah.
Because Corbin Burns is a free agent after 24. Woodruff is a free agent after 24. Peralta, a free agent after 24. So three of your best pitchers, three of the best in the entire league, but pull up their lineup. After the first three or four people, who are these guys? And I'm kind of delivering that comedically, but I was looking at the lineups the other day. I would maybe take the Cubs starting nine right now. And so if pitching and defense is the Cubs' plan, maybe they do win enough 4-3, 5-4 ball games this year. And the next thing you know, they're in a battle with the Brewers for second. Next thing you know, it's the trade deadline. They're still in contention. They could see the Cardinals. They could peek down the road and still see them for the first time in 3-4 years. So I think that's probably the biggest question, is where are the Cubs on, say, June 1st, and how is that going to snowball from there? Because I do think it's going to be tough to make the playoffs. The path is hard. What teams that made it last year are going to be eliminated? They all got a lot better. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. I think it's an exciting team, and maybe some of those prospects surprise and actually come up this year and take over the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've said this anytime I've evaluated a lot of teams in Major League Baseball, there's always, like at this point, there's always about maybe 2, possibly 3 teams that are new to going into the postseason. And whether that's in the American or the National League, and that's kind of been the average for the last few years. But yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, the Brewers could go on a run or they could slow down very easily.
Right.
But things have gotten weird with as far as the Corbin Burns situation.
Yeah.
I don't know how Milwaukee's going to deal with that, but I think to me it's a really just an approach I wouldn't have taken. But still, money's where it's at, and whoever's got the money and talking, that's where they really got to come to a deal. But I truly think that the Cubs and Cardinals, in my opinion, really would make it very entertaining. And like you said, from the June 1st stretch all the way down to where we get to the hard months of September and right to October baseball, that's where you really are going to see the stretches of both teams and how they really develop and how deep they get in through the playoffs. So be interesting to see how this year goes, but I'm excited for it. But Matt, I appreciate you coming on by. Where can people find you to finding all things Chicago Cubs?
We are at Locked On Cubs. My podcast partner and good friend Sam Olber and I do a daily podcast on the Cubs. You can find that Monday through Friday on YouTube and in your ears, wherever you get your podcast on the audio side.
There you go, folks. Matt Cozzi, Locked On Cubs. Great having you here on a Sunday, and especially just super spectacular and stacked. It's been a lot of fun. Love to have you back on. Good luck with the Cubs, and we'll see exactly where the season pans out for them.
Baseball's in the air. Thanks, Jake.
Absolutely. Matt Cozzi, Locked On Cubs. Great stuff. So